how something like a semiconductor dispute could lead to a major European government doing a complete U-turn? I mean, a hostile takeover reversed.
It's pretty stunning, isn't it? This whole Nexperia crisis, as people are calling it. It really does feel like a strategic play, almost China pushing back hard against what they saw as, well, European overreach.
Exactly. And that's what we want to unpack here. How did this happen? The Netherlands tried this pretty aggressive takeover, and now China's back in control management, assets, the works.
Right. So the big questions are, was this just a total win for China? What kind of leverage did they actually use? And maybe crucially, is this fight really over? Because the ownership, the equity part, that's still up in the air.
Okay, let's start with the evidence. This agreement, the temporary coordination plan, what does it actually say?
Well, it's basically the blueprint of the Dutch retreat. It lays out point by point how they're backing down from their original plan. It's quite detailed.
How much did they give up on the management side? What were the key concessions?
Oh, it's comprehensive. First off, that whole joint management idea, they floated. Gone. They completely abandoned it.
Okay.
And all those restrictions they put on the Chinese executives, lifted, they're free to operate again.
And the CEO himself, Zhang Xuezheng.
He's back. Formally reappointed this month. That's maybe the biggest signal, right? Plus, all the headquarters assets, the authorizations that were frozen.
Yeah.
They agreed to release everything by November 13th. It's like handing back the keys they tried to take.
Wow. That really is a complete operational surrender. They gave back every lever. And you mentioned wider implications for Europe.
Yes, that's a really important part of this deal. The EU has apparently committed to, let's say, discouraging other member states from pulling similar moves in the future, trying to block investments like this.
So it sets a precedent,
Yeah.
essentially. Makes
Yeah.
it harder for others to try the same thing.
Kind of, yeah. It adds a political cost, you could say. Makes unilateral actions based on, quote, national security much trickier down the line.
Okay, so the Netherlands and EU gave up a lot. What did China offer in return? What was their side of the bargain?
It really boils down to one thing, the supply chain. China agreed to start unfreezing production capacity, specifically at that absolutely critical Dongguan packaging factory.
Oh, Dongguan.
That's the trade-off right there. Management control and governance authority swapped for supply chain relief. It shows you exactly where the power really lay in this whole situation.
Right, which brings us straight to the why. Why did Europe cave? You said it wasn't politics, it was economics, a chokehold.
Yeah.
What was so special about Dongguan?
It wasn't gentle political persuasion, that's for sure. It was pure commercial panic, mostly from their biggest customers, think German automakers.
Okay.
The pressure was immense. We're talking formal requests to China, basically begging for an exemption from chip export controls because they were looking at potential shutdowns. Catastrophe, really.
And these weren't even the fancy cutting-edge chips everyone talks about, were they?
Not at all. That's the irony. Dongguan makes something like 80 billion chips a year. Mostly simple logic chips, individually, worth maybe a few cents.
Just pennies.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The whole manufacturing system is built around them, so finely tuned. If those cheap little things disappear, you can't just find them somewhere else quickly. Not at that scale. The alternatives just don't exist.
And the numbers showing Europe's dependence, they're pretty stark, aren't they?
They're frightening, frankly. Something like 70% of European auto chip packaging relies on China. 70%. Germany's industrial heartland, the EU's economic engine, it just couldn't afford a shutdown.
You hear reports like VW only having 26 weeks of inventory left.
Exactly. And 26 weeks might sound like a decent buffer, but in the auto industry, where cars come off the line constantly, that's red alert territory. Less than 6 months before lines could just stop.
Real panic stations.
Absolutely. Big suppliers, Continental, Bosch, they were already drawing up plans. Continental threatening unpaid leave, Bosch prepping for shutdowns. This wasn't some abstract risk. It was imminent. The cost of keeping up the fight just got way too high.
So the economic pressure was overwhelming. But let's connect this back to the legal side. Why did Zhang Xuezheng and his company, Wingtech, actually have the stronger legal position when the Dutch made their move? We need to rewind a bit.
Yeah, the history matters here. Nexperia used to be part of Philips. A very successful part, actually.
Well, I remember that.
Philips spun it off years ago. They wanted to focus on higher margin stuff, like medical devices. Smart move for them, maybe. Meanwhile, you have Zhang Xuezheng.
He was in mobile phone assembly, wasn't he? Low margin.
Exactly. Margins were collapsing there. So he makes this really strategic shift into semiconductors, sees an opportunity.
And then Nexperia acquisition itself, how did that happen? Was it all above board?
Oh, yeah. It happened over, I think, 3 or 4 stages, cost around 38 billion RMB in total. They eventually got to 100% ownership. But the key moment was back in 2018.
What happened then?
They bought the first big chunk, 76%. That gave them clear majority control. And in business terms, once you own over 51%, you call the shots. You appoint the CEO, you control the company.
So the Dutch government was essentially trying to seize a company that had been 100% legally and privately acquired.
Pretty much. That's why Wingtech had the legal high ground. It wasn't a state-owned asset they were nationalizing. It was private property.
Okay, so management control is restored, but you mentioned the unfinished war. This recent agreement, this temporary coordination plan, it didn't touch ownership, right? The equity issue is still there.
No, it completely sidestepped it, which tells you where the fight goes next. It's moving away from the factory floor and into the capital markets, boardroom politics, and probably international courts.
Because the initial Dutch justification that Zhang's investment was somehow a front for the Chinese state, they couldn't prove it.
They didn't seem to have solid proof, no. And our analysis suggests China feels very confident they can win any legal challenge on this, challenging the Dutch government's interference in, normal corporate governance.
So this could drag on for years, a legal battle over shares and control.
It could easily become a long, drawn-out fight over finance and ownership. The operational battle might be over, but the capital battle, that seems like it's just getting started.
And just before we wrap up, let's not forget the internal corporate drama. This whole thing was apparently kicked off from inside Nexperia. Something about 3 foreign execs.
Yeah, there's definitely a human element here. Reports suggest 3 senior non-Chinese executives, legal, finance operations played a key role in Zhang Xuezheng getting pushed out initially. They sort of facilitated the government's move.
Okay.
So now with Zhang making this king's return, as some are calling it, the focus shifts. It's less about government strategy now and more about, standard corporate practice, internal accountability.
And in the often brutal world of corporate leadership, what does that usually mean for executives who backed the losing side in a power struggle?
It usually means they're out. I mean, think about it. If you actively worked against the majority owner, helped try to oust the CEO, you've broken that fundamental trust.
Right.
Zhang might keep them around for a little while just to smooth the transition, make sure things stabilize under the new agreement. But standard practice, those 3 betrayers, as they might be seen internally, their days are likely numbered. You just can't effectively run a global company with people in key positions who tried to take you down.
Okay, so putting it all together, this huge reversal, this clash where economic reality trumped geopolitical maneuvering.
Mm-hmm.
What's the main takeaway here?
I think the core insight is how powerful supply chain dependence really is, especially for these seemingly low-value, high-volume parts like basic auto chips. It turned out to be a much stronger weapon than diplomatic notes or political speeches.
The economic leverage was just overwhelming?
Exactly. The Dutch government, and maybe the EU more broadly, learned a hard lesson. Trying to seize control of privately owned global companies that hold that kind of critical supply chain power. Well, it comes with unbearable economic consequences if the other side pushes back hard. Industrial stability won out.
And looking ahead,
Mm-hmm.
you see this as potentially just the start. The Netherlands was first, then the pressure point was Germany. Could this become a pattern across Europe?
It really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? If Germany, the EU's industrial powerhouse, could be forced to scramble like this over basic components, what does that mean for smaller European nations trying to protect their critical supply chains?
It makes sovereignty look pretty fragile in certain sectors.
Extremely. The Nexperia situation is a very sharp, probably painful lesson. Trying to nationalize or seize control of these kinds of global players, especially when they hold that kind of supply chain leverage, it just might not be sustainable against determined economic counterpressure. So the big question for policymakers is, how do you secure your industrial future when it relies on components that cost pennies but are made elsewhere? That's the dilemma they're facing now.
A really critical question indeed. So what's your take on this? We'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. Share your point of view in the comments below. And if you found these insights useful, maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss our future analyses.